Okay, it's a little after 1 p.m. on May the 1st, and I'm going to call a meeting to order, and the first thing we have on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Bruce, you want to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance?
More than happy. Oh, which one?
You're front. You're first.
Okay, ready, begin. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, is there any actions taken in closed session, Mr. Garber?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Approval of the order and agenda items. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as it is?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please vote. Thank you. We're going to move on to public comments. Anybody that has any public comments, please step to the podium, state your name for the record, and you have 5 minutes.
My name is Jean Montenegro, and I'm an English professor at Imperial Valley College. My English 101 students had to do a 10-page research paper, and I had 43 topics all pertaining to Imperial Valley. So, as I read them and graded them, I thought it would be nice for other people to see what kind of work these students have done and the amount of research that they did. So this morning, 5 of my students presented their papers at Imperial County Office of Education to the cabinet members. And it was a wonderful session. The cabinet members had a lot of questions to ask the students. Some of their topics were bullying in school, juvenile crime in Imperial County, and so forth. This afternoon, I'm very happy to have, I had 3, but one of the students, Charles Graham, asked to be excused because he was on the way to San Diego for a job interview at Walmart. I shook his hand and said, I'll give them your paper. So his topic that he did was sand dunes recreation and who benefits. Okay. And then the 2 young ladies up here with me did research topics. One is on the Salton Sea restoration and the other one on the All-American Canal. So they will introduce themselves and so forth.
My name is Jocelyn Luker. I did my topic on the All-American Canal. I found it very interesting. It was very interesting because the All-American Canal, before it was an All-American Canal, it went into Mexico for 50 miles. And I had a lot of help. I interviewed one of your board members, Matt Desert, and also Kevin Kelly. It is a very interesting topic. Do you guys have any questions?
No, we appreciate you coming, and we also appreciate you doing topics that deal with the Imperial Irrigation District, the All-American Canal, Salton Sea, so that's good.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisbeth Villarreal, and I wrote about Salton Sea because after being there on a field trip, I was shocked about the critical situation the Salton Sea has been facing for the past decades. Since then, I couldn't understand why the government has underestimated the potential benefits the Salton Sea will be able to offer if restored, or the problems it will cause if left unattended. As you know, the Salton Sea is a crucial part of the Pacific Flyway and is an important agricultural reservoir for of the Imperial Valley and was once one of the most productive fisheries of the nation. I believe the Salton Sea restoration has been delayed because of economic reasons. In my opinion, the Salton Sea restoration should be seen as an investment because it's, in my opinion, an potentially productive natural resource, which is able to offer benefits to the government, the people, and the ecosystem economically, recreationally, and environmentally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions from the board or audience? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you bringing the students down here and working on topics that involve the Imperial Valley.
You're more than welcome. I think it's nice for people to know what kind of work our students are doing. So we are to turn these in. You ladies want to turn these in? And on their
Why don't you go ahead and speak into the mic? Speak into the microphone so the tape can pick you up.
On the title page, under their name is how you can reach them. So if you had a question or anything, then you'll be able to communicate directly with them. You shouldn't put me on the mic. The other thing the students did, and I'll explain that very briefly. They read an essay in their textbook and they wrote about peer pressure. I didn't like reading those. And they wrote essays. So, and some of them had done unkind things. So I assigned, they had to write an essay about a random act of kindness, and they had to remain anonymous. Those were fantastic. I read those and smiled. They're inspiring, etc. And so I'm putting them in a book. And one young lady did a random act of kindness for a homeless man whose only residence was a red chair. That's where he lived. And so she waited till he left, and she left a rotisserie chicken, a gallon of water, and a loaf of bread. And it was what that act did to my students that is so fantastic. You want to read it. So we are making a book, and it'll be called The Red Chair and Other Acts of Essays About Kindness. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming and bringing your students. Okay, is there any other public comments? Lindsay?
Thank you, Mrs. Montenegro. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay Dale, Imperial County Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau recognizes the importance of the IID's future course of action with the QSA agreement, and our board members feel that you as the IID Board of Directors have a window of opportunity to make important decisions for the benefit of the residents of Imperial Valley. By giving our most precious precious asset, our water, away, we continue to sacrifice the health and the well-being of our residents and our children. We have in Imperial County, if not the highest, one of the highest respiratory disease rates in the country. This will only increase, we feel, with a dry Salton Sea and a failing QSA. So therefore, the Farm Bureau wishes to reaffirm our position that you seriously consider and implement the recommendations made by Mr. Dumars over the last few months. I know that we're going to be hearing some final comments from him, hopefully soon, and we hope that you will seriously consider those and implement those. He's got some great ideas there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeMars is going to be coming to speak before this board in public session on the 15th.
On the 15th. Is that a 1 o'clock meeting or a 5 o'clock?
I think it's a 1 o'clock meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bruce?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Bruce Kuhn, 1240 Drew Road. I couldn't help but see the signs, and I just thought I'd let anyone who wants to know that I don't work for Imperial Group. I'm not a member of Imperial Group. I don't belong to CoLab. I don't belong to Imperial Valley First, never did. And wealthy landowners, well, how's this? Imperial Group, I think if you all remember, they blistered my ass here many, many times. So I have to assume that this was all directed at poor Ruben Casares, and I don't know where he stands on it, but I can tell you for myself, the only other wealthy landowners I had to fight were the Bass brothers, and that's when John Pierre worked for them. And they wanted to take our water also. And it was all Don Cox and I could do because we only had 2 votes to keep him from doing that. But we did, and I'm proud of it. So when it comes to wealthy landowners, I'm not, it's not a stranger to me to have to stand up for the IID and what's right. But trust me, the Bass brothers had more money than all the wealthy landowners to which you speak to here. And one of your directors worked for them. So let's keep fighting those wealthy landowners. Thank you.
Mike Morgan Brawley. I didn't know the board took up for advertising on the front of their seats, but I think maybe it'll be effective. I'm sure Kevin's had a lot to think about. Since I last read that email to you, I've done a lot more research on it with the help of 60 Minutes. That email that Mike sent, that Kevin was talking about, was because he had arranged free financing for life safety systems for the All-American Canal. It was absolutely a government grant that would have installed them immediately, and we don't have a count, 60 Minutes is working on it, but X amount of people died while the IID played politics. Because in that email you'll see, in the chains that follow it, they wanted to keep it out of the election cycle. So they didn't want safety things in the All-American Canal. And it kind of goes back, the reason 60 Minutes called me is they saw it. And then Stella's comments they sent to me, like one of them, which is that the IID is supposed to save every individual that jumps in the canal. I don't think the IID was supposed to save every individual that jumped in the canal, but if they had free safety devices, why wouldn't they put them in? I mean, this is a largely Hispanic community, lives on the Mexican border. So anyway, as that email, whether John Pierre gets an investigation for criminal things or whether you get whistleblower status, you need to follow what's going on in this place because that wasn't right. Then also reading some newspaper articles, my good friend Tony here, when they signed the QSA, Tony Ramos urged the board to vote against the deal. John Pierre, we've got to get rid of the attorneys. They've had their day in the sun. Adding the district is controlled much too much by its legal team. Now the same campaign's coming out against the landowners, which I think could be the beneficiaries of the water trust. So the campaign is consistent. It seems that it'll be going on for a while. And with the help, though, the other thing that came to our attention today is that you're trying, which is fine. I think Kevin has decided to buy up most of the advertising on the newspaper on Sundays to advertise the entity, which you should advertise, was estimated at being worth $120 to $150 million. IID settled in fear of arbitration with San Diego to get $50 million. So you might as well put up what's left in the entity funds, come get them as soon as you can. And then the advertisements, you're taking 2 half-page advertisements to do land sales. Now that's effective. It keeps other people from advertising on the paper, leaves it wide open for Stella and Jean Pierre. But is it what the IID wants to do? That the IID is for the ratepayers. It's not for a special secret group that runs the place today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Anybody else have any public comments? Mr. Ramos?
One good thing about everybody that spoke is that we're all civil. even with Bruce and Jean-Pierre asked Bruce to do the Pledge of Allegiance. If we hadn't done that, I would have asked if I could have done it, because I'm an American, just like everybody else here. And I'm proud to toot my horn that I served my country in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970. I didn't go to Vietnam, but I was there during the Vietnam era serving my country, and I would have done it again. And then I come back to the Valley, get an education, and find out that what I didn't know when I went in the Air Force, I should have known many years ago. And that an education opens your mind. It lets you speak publicly here, have the courage to speak and not be afraid of board members or the farmers, because the farmers are friends of ours too. My dad died because of the pesticide, insecticides he came in through his body working for the farmers. And I'm not making an excuse. That's what happened back then. But let me tell you, this campaign is about what I said, and I paid for those. I did those. If anybody else wanted to bring COLA, Imperial Science, Menville, Mendoza wouldn't say nothing either. It's an open door policy for anybody to protest and do anything against or for what you believe in. Stella's article, it says, Imperial vying for Imperial resources stop them. It's very good. And I put down Imperial Valley First votes for Imperial Group refuse stop them. That's what I would have put to. In fact, I might, how much does this cost? About $500? Well, whatever it costs, I don't have the money to do that, but else I would do my own sign. But people, when people advertise and have billboards and say that 715,000 square feet we're using a space, that's almost 16 acres of land, because 43,560 square feet is in an acre. And if you divide it into the 715,000 square feet, what they claim that the IID is using for office space, then that's 16 acres. That's a lot of land. I don't believe that. The other thing is when you Imperial Group talk about that, you're putting the IID workers and the people they serve on the spot. Where should they go, to work under a tree? You know, or should they put all the equipment in an empty field somewhere? You know, our IID has equipment, has poles, has trucks, heavy equipment that they need the space to put all this. So when you put our supervisors, you really put the workers here down too. And it would help Mr. Hanks and Mr. Sanchez that you support Stella and Jean-Pierre, because by not doing so, you support Imperial Group, COLAB, and Imperial First. I know you would, Sanchez, but I hope that Mr. Zizzer and Mr. Hanks supports them too, because you're going to be running for office later on, and the same thing would happen to you. To me, ladies and gentlemen, all this is about who's going to transfer more water and who's going to benefit from it. And as the sign said, the farmers are. We're going to turn this Imperial Valley into another Owens Valley. I've seen it. I wrote about it before. When I first started politicking in favor of the IID and the customers and the people that live here, I came here with a jug of water, saying that a jug of water represented what the valley had in water. And after the water transfer, we'd only have half a gallon of water. And I said that last week. Now we're down to maybe a quarter of a gallon, because people living in the desert shouldn't be transferring water. And as the First Amendment, under the First Amendment of the Brown Act, anybody has a right to bring signs to contradict what I said. Anybody. And I invite them. I have nothing against Bruce, against Mike Morgan. But remember, Bruce, you were the one that voted for the water transfer. You, Maldonado, and the other gentleman, what was his name, JP?
Lloyd Allen.
Lloyd Allen. That's just what started it. You guys started it, not us. Stella and Andy Horn voted against it. So if you sit up here and throw rocks at JP, I'm not throwing rocks at you, but I'm just saying who started all this. Now we have to defend the QSA because there's nothing else we can do. You know. So to me, people, they're out in the county, listen to what I'm saying. I have nothing to gain except offer my help to you, because I'm not getting money from the water transfer. All I'm getting is that our children live here for hundreds and hundreds of years, because if we keep transferring water, our valley is going to turn to another Owens Valley. And to me, we can't do that. In another 30 years, most of us here, except for Mr. Sanchez, 34 years, we're not going to be here no more. Well, what should we do this for? Our children, their future. And let's cut out all the BS on this. Who benefits from this more? Me or the farmers? And to me, it's the farmers. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ramos, anybody else from the public want to speak? All right, thank you very much. We'll bring it back to the board member comments. We'll start with Director Hanks.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. There was an article in the paper about a $2 million pipeline being reconsidered to San Diego. I would say that's a little more than a straw in the river. I think it's a guzzler out of the Imperial Valley. And I also would suggest that that means there must be another transfer in the making. I didn't vote for a transfer, and I'm not going to continue to vote for a transfer.
Thank you, Director Hanks. Director Mendoza?
No comment.
Director Sanchez?
Kevin, if we can follow up with Director Hanks's comments on the strategy behind San Diego's pipeline. Is it how big is the pipeline? Is it going to hold just the 200,000 acre feet that they purchased, or they leased? I'm sorry, it wasn't a purchase, it was a lease. As far as from the IID, if there's any supplies out there from Mexico they're looking at getting, just kind of do your marketing and research on that whole pipeline to the best you can. Also, as a potential and as a beneficiary of the water, Mr. Morgan said that they are a potential beneficiary of the water, which to some degree that still could hold true because the courts haven't played out. But until the court says, district, the only beneficiary is the landowners, until they say that, I will continue to lead and provide decisions for the valley as if I am a beneficiary, single as a vote, one equal vote asked to Mr. Morgan, not because I have a lot less acres than he does. So as a beneficiary, we have to always decide how do we best use the water. And I know Tony has said who are the who's getting the good end of the deal. I love business, and I've always been supportive of subsidies, so to speak, especially in how much these on-farm conservation will cost. However, I think it's important that we don't move away from subsidies and move away from on-farm conservation and strict fallowing, paying a landowner $400 or $500, $600 an acre foot for not farming. I know my dad's always taught me to work to eat. I think everybody needs, and I think a lot of people agree that everybody needs to work to eat. And to pay a landowner $600 an acre foot without having to farm, without having to take the risk like we all do on the open market, so to speak, I think is not beneficial for our people in Imperial Valley. But I do believe that we need to help our fellow people who live in Imperial County, that I understand that these items such as a pump back station, irrigators, pipes, all these things are expensive. And I'm there and I'm trying my best to give them the money that they need to continue to yield the same product. And unfortunately, sometimes the QSA may not have the amount of money that everybody desires. But it was signed in 2003 let's talk about age. I was about to say before I was born, before I was on the board. And now it's important that we have to continue to work with the contract and not be the first ones to breach it. I don't know how huge the liability is. We talk about, well, what's the liability for the district if we don't breach it? Right, for the example, Salton Sea, but what is the liability if we do breach it? And that is an unknown, and we haven't had a workshop on. And I think it's important that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sanchez. I have no comments. I'll move on to the General Manager, Mr. Kelly.
Yes, President Minville, members of the board, I do have a prepared statement to read in response to the joint FERC-NERC report issued this morning at a press conference in Washington, D.C. But before I do, I should say that when we start down this road of openness and videotaping our meetings and allowing for extensive public comment, you really can't go half measures. But I am mindful that our meetings have gone from a circus-like atmosphere lately into a carnival sideshow. And I would ask, with the board's concurrence, that everyone that approaches the dais try and be respectful of the nonpartisan nature of what used to be IID board meetings. And Mr. Morgan, you are being deliberately mistruthful, and I'm not going to engage in a back and forth with you, but I'd appreciate it very much if you would refrain from making such sweeping statements that you know to be factually incorrect. With that, I would like to have read into the record and reflected in the minutes. The Imperial Irrigation District is reviewing the report jointly issued today by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the North American Electric Reliability Corporation on the September 8th outage. And we'll have more to say in response when that review is complete. What I can say about the report and the facts surrounding the September 8th event is that IID has cooperated fully with this joint inquiry, and while we may dispute some of the findings in the report, the district is committed to implementing any of its recommendations that will lead to greater visibility between and among this organization and neighboring balancing authorities. What we do know, and the record clearly demonstrates, is that IID restored service to its customers faster than did other affected systems in the region. In fact, service to all IID customers was restored in roughly 6 hours, which is a testament to the acumen of the district system operators and its troubleshooters in the field. What we also know is that after IID shed load to rebalance and stabilize its own system, generation and transmission facilities under the control of other load-serving entities in the region continued to experience significant operational disturbances and disruptions in service. This resulted in a blackout of the rest of the IID system. One area of considerable focus in the report has been the possible impact of IID's protection system relays on certain transformers in the Coachella Valley that tripped open during the event. From the outset, IID has taken the position that the protective relays on these substation transformers performed as they should have and were in fact needed to prevent serious damage from the excessive power flows surging through the district system from adjacent balancing authorities. Based on what has been learned to date, not only through its own internal review, but via a parallel assessment done by an independent consultant, the district fundamentally rejects any assertion that its relay operations to protect its transformers from damage led to the cascading effect associated with the September 8th outage. At the same time, IID has taken several affirmative steps to mitigate against a repeat of the same unique set of circumstances that confronted the district during the September 8th event, including raising the trip settings on the Coachella Valley substation transformers to allow for increased emergency loading levels. In addition, the district is installing a third transformer at its Coachella Valley substation to further increase the system's surge withstand capability heading into the summer. IID remains committed to working constructively and expeditiously with other transmission operators, balancing authorities, regional coordinators, and regulatory agencies to enhance the overall reliability of the bulk electric system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Do you have any other comments on anything else? Okay, thank you. Mr. Garber?
No comments, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Garber. We're going to move on to the consent. Does anybody have any items to be pulled from the consent? There are just two. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Okay, there's a second.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Please
There's no
vote.
discussion on consent.
Okay, no discussion on consent. Please vote. Thank you. We'll move on to number 3, information, water, general matters. Mr. Silva, that's on page 13.
Yes, Mr. President, the rest of the board, we are still running capacity in our canal system, but we are down on our carryovers from 4 and 5 days down to 2 and 3 days, so we are making some headway even though we're still running a lot of water. Last week, we had a lot of growth of moss in our system, and we had, over the weekend, we had 3 canals run over, and we had not any damage to speak of, but it just shows that moss can grow at different times of the year. Sometimes we get it early, sometimes we get it late. So this week, we're having all our crews out there working our canal system, trying to reduce that moss in the system so that we can keep running the canals without running them over. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Silva?
I've got a question. On this $2 billion pipeline that's being proposed to San Diego, if we have to fill that up and then continue to fill up the California aqueduct, I'd like to have a report back how many acre-feet of water that it's going to take to do that, because it sure appears to me that it's intended to come out of Imperial Valley. And I'd also like to know what the effect would be on the price, because I understand that our price that we receive contractually in the QSA is dependent upon some of the MWD prices. So if there is a pipeline that's built, is that going to be built with Imperial Valley money?
IID pricing would only revert back to the MWD pricing at the end of the term of the current schedule that was set up by the settlement, and that's after 30 years, Greg? 2034.
Director Hanks, on the pipeline story, that is a revival of an earlier proposal that actually predates the QSA. I doubt that you could get San Diego to go on the record, but I would characterize it as posturing. Posturing in its continuing war of words with Metropolitan. We will determine, or we will produce for you the specifications of that proposal.
Yes, and I agree with Kevin. I think these communications are really meant for Met's consumption more than ours.
Mr. Kelly, isn't there or I guess I should ask Lori, isn't there a resolution by present boards that is against the second straw in the river that this board passed a long time ago? I think there's resolutions by the Chambers of Commerce in the Valley against another straw in the river. So you may want to look that up and bring that back to the meeting at a later date. Anybody else have any other questions of Mr. Silva? Anybody from the audience have any water questions? Mr. Ramos?
Can I approach?
Yeah, no, please, go to the podium.
JP and audience, I read that article yesterday on that pipeline, and it said, right on the front page, said that they're going to get the water from Imperial County. And I figured, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, we can't mess with Med because they're too big and strong, and we're going to go after Imperial County and get the water. As a member of the public and concerned citizen, this is what the public sees. Is this true, or are they going to do it somewhere else? And then they say they lost money in lining the canal and building the canal. So are we going to be left with a big bill, and the taxpayers are going to end up paying that to the IID, or what's going to happen? Mr. Hanks, you seem to be involved in that. Would you mind answering that?
Which one are you talking about?
About the article yesterday.
I just saw that there was a $2 billion one. Are you talking about lining the All-American?
No, I mean the article talked about that. Let me put it.
Let me tell you, if you took the price of that water that we're currently getting, we should have lined the canal and took the money ourselves. In addition to that cost, the state of California picked in a pretty hefty amount. And we're part of the state of California, so that means we paid for part of the lining of the canal also.
I guess my question is simple and to the point, is that the front page said they were going to get the water from Imperial County. Is that true or not true? The San Diego Water District was going to get the water from the
I think the purpose of revitalizing the second pipeline is so they don't have to deal with going through MWD's aqueduct, because they're paying high wheeling charges, so they would build their own pipeline to transport their conserved water from Imperial Valley that they have under the QSA. But the people are against the second straw in the river, so it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
No.
That's what I wanted to get. Thank you very much.
Let me just add a comment. You know, if you're talking about building $2 billion pipelines and you have a canal built, they don't build these things to skateboard in. They build them to put water in it. They keep talking about straws in the river. The straws are coming out of Imperial Valley.
It's always been, they've always referred to it in the past as a second straw in a river, and that's why I said second straw in a river. That's an old saying. As you look up the newspaper articles, I always call it the second straw in a river. So go ahead, Mr. Morgan.
I should give these to you in writing so Kevin can okay them, but you should be aware it is your engineering firm that's doing this. It's CH2M Hill. It's the engineering firm you gave a no competition bid to that's doing your rework of the State Water Resource Control Order at the favor of David Osias, the attorney who represents all the big land developers in San Diego. So, Tony, I agree 100% with you, but don't give it up. Keep tracking it down, because it's the engineering firm the attorney's hired, it's the attorney's work they're doing in Sacramento, it's the next transfer out of here, which is the water from the Salton Sea, and it's not the Imperial Group, Tony, trust me.
Mr. Morgan, you should be reminded it's your Uncle Johnny Elmore that got us into the transfer business back in the early 1980s. That's why we're transferring water, because of your family. Mr. Kuhn?
First things first, I think it's important that everybody know that one of their plans was to put that pipeline in Mexico. That was bantered around for quite a long time. In fact, they were going to, one of their proposals was partner with the city of Tijuana. I believe that's what it was, Jess. And they were going to partner with Tijuana and put it on the Mexican side so that they didn't have all the federal regulations to put up with to do it. So don't discount that. But the water they're talking about right now is the water that they're getting through the transfer. Now, will they build it bigger? Probably. If they build it, I'm guessing that they would probably be able to score some acre feet out of Mexico, especially if it's on the Mexican side of the border. Does that mean they wouldn't take another run at us? Nope, because they certainly might. But let's just remain cognizant of the fact that when we gave up the escalators in the first transfer, the one that I brought is not the same one now, Tony. It's been changed. And it's been changed to the detriment of this valley. And to the tune, the estimates out there are about $1.2 billion. So San Diego, they may have just gotten all pumped up because 60% of that price may well have just been paid by us for free. Think about that.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. Anybody else have any comments on the water matters? If not, we'll move on to the fourth item on the agenda, which is the update on the system conservation plan. It's on page 14. And Josh Scott's going to handle that.
Mr. President, if I can give you a little bit of background, excuse me, just to get us all up to speed on this. If you remember, system conservation that we're talking about consists of eliminating spill. That's the majority of the water, and also conserving the seepage from main canals. We've already done the seepage recovery system, and what's left basically is eliminating the spills. On farm, the thought was that the farmers would become more efficient on farm and therefore result in less water applied to the farms. So that's the premise that we've had on the plan. What we're talking about today, the first phase, is what I consider the infrastructure that's required to be able to accomplish those two efforts on farm and the system. And there's four basic elements. The real-time monitoring of our spills, and there's about 90, almost 100 sites that we're going to be installing monitoring systems so that the San Jero knows what's going on real time. We're also going to install about 200 monitoring systems on deliveries to be able for the San Jeros also to know in real time what's going on. And then we're going to install 22 automated gates on the headings of laterals. There's 180 laterals or so, but we're only going to do 22 at this time, so that the San Jero also knows what's going on at the headings of the canals. And then the final item is improvements of our SCADA and communication systems that will allow all that information to be available to the San Jero in real time. So all this is necessary to be able to, in the future, then be able to measure and know that we're actually conserving water from the spills, and if on the on-farm, if we are reducing our deliveries to the farmers. So again, this first phase to me is just the infrastructure that's required. On the future phases, we'll be able to do whatever else is required. And I know that since I've been here 6 months or so, we've gotten our staff more involved in making this plan more ours. There seemed to be a little bit too much before, too much reliance on consultants' work, and now I feel comfortable that we've adapted and changed it to the point where our people are comfortable that we can make it work. As we go into the second phase, I believe we'll be able to do the same thing, change it, adapt it to make it more flexible so that we can feel comfortable that we can make it work. Anyway, Josh will give you an update on the specifics of where we're at. Josh.
Thank you,
Mr.
Jesse.
Silva. Go ahead, Josh.
I was here towards the end of last year, gave a quick update. I think it was right after our first RFP went out, and that took kind of a wide swath approach to this. And as Jesse said, in the last 6 months or so, we've done a lot of work in-house to kind of make this ours, put our thumbprint on it. So I'll just give you a quick update of the process there with that last RFP, where we're at today, and kind of a quick glimpse at the future here. That first RFP went out mid-October last year, and as you recall, it took a kind of a turnkey approach. It put a lot of the risk, or in fact, all of the risk, onto the contractor. And it was one big RFP, one big scope of work, and it included 2 phases to this first part of the SCP. It included phase 1A, part 1, which would put in this infrastructure with the current funding as approved in the NWA. And it also asked for pricing on phase 1A, part 2, which would be the balance of the delivery measurement devices, the lateral headings, and the rest of the work to be done under this first phase. And that RFP included, as Jesse said, SCADA and SCADA communications, the lateral headings, delivery measurement, spill monitoring, and then there was a 5th component of that RFP, which was maintenance. The approach that RFP took was to solicit a maintenance agreement from those contractors, ask them to provide long-term maintenance. We were asking for a 5-year pricing in that RFP. We put that out on the street, like I said, latter part of October, and went through the pre-proposal process. We had the pre-proposal meeting, and we had about 50 people attend that meeting, and they represented various contractors and vendors interested in this work. And through the Q&A period on this, we got about 50 questions from vendors and contractors, ranging from the benign clarifications on page counts, things like that, to the very technical. And one of those questions was asking us to extend the due date, which we did, gave them another 2 weeks, got the proposals back shortly before Christmas last year. We got 3 proposals, complete proposals from 3 different vendors. And after taking a quick look at them, we saw very, very quickly that there was some discrepancies between the phase 1A Part 1 and 1A Part 2 work within each respective proposal, as well as some large disparities in the pricing between the three proposals. And way out of line with some of the budget estimates we had and some of the pricing that we had put together prior to releasing that RFP. So that told us, coupled with the amount of questions we got and some of the technical questions, that it was going to be difficult to evaluate these RFPs. Very tough to choose a clear winner, and also kind of sparked some discussion internally at that point. So we stepped back, took a look at our needs, our risk tolerance. Like I said, that first RFP kind of pushed all the risk off onto the contractor, what we as a district might be willing to accept, what we could do to modify that RFP, the scope of work, things like that, to realize some kind of cost savings in there. And we took a look at the maintenance. That was one of the areas where we had very large discrepancies between the RFPs, was in the maintenance side of things. So after some discussion, we decided to close that RFP with no award. We did that mid-January, first part of this year. And we started a reevaluation process. We took a look at first that turnkey approach, that putting this all onto the contractor. We started talking about what we could do in-house. What could we do? What should we do? The size and scope of that RFP. We felt that it probably precluded some vendors from participating, some contractors from getting involved, and it was also clear that because of the nature of the construction work for a portion of this, it required a licensed contractor. And so we saw multiple layers of overhead and markup in those proposals. And we also were concerned a little bit about the limited response. How could we open this up a little bit to encourage more participation, more submittals? And so we took a step back, like I said, evaluation period, went through a needs assessment in-house. Now that needs assessment started with our SCADA system. The original RFP called for a new SCADA system to be provided by the contractor. So we took a look at a new SCADA system versus expanding the current SCADA system we have. How scalable was it? Would it meet the needs of the program and ultimately the needs of the district? We looked at the monitoring. That was another component of that original RFP. We were asking the contractor to provide continuous monitoring of our SCADA system along with his maintenance activities so that he could respond to alarms and make repairs. Took a look at the lateral headings, the number of gates that we were trying to automate with this first round. Thought we might take a more strategic approach and really dial in the number of gates and which laterals we should automate with this first round. On the delivery measurement side, we took a look at the technologies available. As you know, this plan was put together some time ago, and some of the technologies that were once cost prohibitive have come down, and we might be able to allow those or encourage those kind of vendors to participate and encourage more competition. And then we took a look at the spill monitoring sites. The original RFP had 134 spill sites that were going to be required to be monitored. And that was one area where we saw a lot of discrepancy between what we had budgeted and the proposals we got back. So with the help of our Ag Water Management Group, we went out and looked at all 134 of those spill sites. We were able to eliminate a number of them and got that down to just over 90, as Jesse said. And in addition to doing that, we were able to identify what type of improvements we were looking for at each one of those sites. Rather than leaving it up to a contractor to decide, we took it upon ourselves to decide which one of several options out there we came up with would be most appropriate. And on the maintenance side, we had a lot of discussion there. As I said, there was a lot of discrepancy in the prices in the maintenance side of things. So we took a look at what we could do in-house as far as maintenance goes. We have a number of automated headings and checks out there now that our SCADA group maintains. What kind of impact that might have to staffing, that sort of thing. and had a lot of good discussion around that. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of field sites going in out there, roughly 5,000 delivery gates, on top of the lateral headings and spill sites. So that's a lot of extra work if we were going to take that on in-house. So we started having discussions how we might break up the maintenance. What could we contract out? What should we contract out? So that led to some planning efforts. And I can't stress enough how much I appreciate the work that our SCADA group and our IT folks have done in this past few months. They have put in a lot of effort, produced a lot of good documents, and really a good plan on how we move this thing forward from the IT and SCADA side of things. They stepped back, did an assessment of our current system, the servers, the hardware we have, the software we have, how we might scale that up to meet the first phase of this program and the ultimate build out. What kind of upgrades would be required? They started putting some costs to that if we were to do that internally. And also how we might leverage some existing enterprise level projects. So it generated a lot of discussion. We also had the telecommunications group on the energy side working on a voice, radio, and mobile data upgrade. So we started interfacing with them a little bit more as far as scheduling goes. They started to dial in what sort of bandwidth we'd be looking at, that sort of thing, to where we could really tighten up the scope of the work to be done here. Another thing we also did was a preliminary SCADA communications coverage study. The original RFP, we were going to leave that up to the contractor to do and tell us the number of towers that were going to be required, the locations, that sort of thing, to make the system talk. And we decided to have an independent coverage study done, planning level, but gives us an idea of where those towers might be, how tall they might be, and the number that we can expect to see. And through that planning effort, we started talking about IID versus contractor responsibilities and how to delineate those. Again, what work could we do in-house? We talked about the SCADA system at length and decided to take that on. Our SCADA group is up to the task of expanding that system to handle not just what we need for the first phase of the SCP, but at ultimate build-out. And the IT side, they're working with our SCADA folks real close on the hardware and software associated with the SCADA server, the different development and QC environments that need to go on, and change change management on the software side of things. And another thing we did was looked at the Zanjero laptops. We're gonna go ahead and bring those in-house as well. Our IT group is going to procure those and manage those once those come in. We thought that was a good, cost-effective change there. Help reduce the estimate there. Excuse me.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
Scott, these laptops, are they going to be the heavy-duty ones? Because Zanjeros, when they work out on the ditch banks, there's a lot of dust, and
they
don't go very slow.
Yeah.
So you make sure that these laptops are heavy-duty, because
they are. IT has a spec now. The folks in the energy department use, and some of the current Zanjeros on the orange lateral and the Veil use now. It's a Panasonic Toughbook, and they've already got it spec'd out. Know exactly what we need there.
Okay.
So we took a look at the work to be done by the contractor. That was on the IID side of the house. Obviously, the field site installation and construction, we would have them do that, install the equipment, commission it. And then on the SCADA side of things, we would have a contractor do the integration with the current SCADA system and develop the SCADA screens, what the Zanjero would see on his laptop, and what sort of data needs to be transferred back and forth. And also build out the SCADA communication system, putting in those towers to get the data from the field back here to headquarters and then back out to the Zanjero laptops. Then we took a look at the maintenance responsibilities. We pulled the maintenance out of all these scopes of work, and we had some discussion about a warranty versus a maintenance period. So we're going to include a very specific warranty period in all of these future contracts, but eliminate the maintenance contract for this first phase of the program. The in-house maintenance, we think we can do that on the control sites. Those would be the lateral headings. Those are mission critical sites. We've got staff that maintain those now, and we can respond within hours versus relying on a contractor. So we're going to take that on as well. However, the maintenance for the monitoring sites, that would be the spills and the deliveries. Those sites, again, aren't mission critical, and there's going to be just the vast number of them would just overwhelm our staff. So we're considering a long-term maintenance contract for those sites. Again, 5,000 plus sites there. So given all that, IID versus contractor responsibilities, as far as maintenance, construction, build out on the IT side of things, how do we break out that scope of work, that big scope of work that we had in the RFP 852? We discussed how to clarify the scope and the specifications, given the number of questions and comments we got during the first RFP release, as well as splitting the RFPs based on the type of work to go on. Again, we tried to lump it all in together. Obviously, we had some issues with that. So in our discussions, we took a look and decided that breaking it up into 3 RFPs made sense. One for the SCADA integration and SCADA screen development and SCADA communications build out. A second one for the lateral headings, and then a third RFP for the monitoring sites, the spills and the farm deliveries. All that will provide smaller scopes, hoping for more competition, more response, and reduced layers of markup and overhead like we saw in that first go-round, and ultimately cost savings to the program. Currently, we've got draft versions of the RFPs that we're reviewing. We've got a comprehensive review scheduled for later this week. Part of that is to make sure that the scopes of all 3 of those RFPs align. It's clear where one contractor's responsibilities ends, another's begins, and where IID's responsibilities lie. We're doing some operational planning. On the SCADA side, they're planning the expansion and are scaling up the SCADA system to handle these additional sites now and for future phases of the program. And we've also got a number of legacy sites out there, sites that are on an existing SCADA system that we need to transfer into what we're going to end up with here for this first phase. They're taking a look at that work now, evaluating what needs to be done to make that happen, and ultimately incorporate that out into the data that gets into the Zanjero's hands. On the IT side, I've been working with IT quite a bit on the hardware and software requirements, not just on the laptops, but on servers. Again, expanding this thing from what we've got now to ultimate build out is going to take some work and some effort. How we might leverage those enterprise efforts that are going on now and planned in the future, and what kind of support we need after implementation. We'll need support on the SCADA server side of things and on the laptops as well. And as far as reporting goes, a few things there. Ongoing work with PMO on the reporting there every month. We've got a stakeholder group within IID that we meet with on a regular basis to update, and then through these board meetings as well. Future activities here, just briefly, kind of higher level schedule. As I said, we're in the process of finalizing the drafts of the RFPs now, but all 3 of these RFPs are interrelated. Again, one contractor's work stops and another's begins. So The intent is to release these all at the same time, and we're hoping to do that early this summer, followed by submittals due sometime late this summer, interviews and selections with contractor late summer, early fall, and then followed up by contract negotiations and a notice to proceed. And after that, you'll see the construction kick off, not just the work out in the field, but our SCADA group and IT folks will have quite a bit to do as well to bring the system up to what we need here for this first 195 deliveries, 22 headings, and about 100 spill sites. Long-term maintenance, again, we're still discussing that, what that exactly looks like, what impacts that might have to staffing, how best to contract that out. But we have removed that from the intention is to remove that from the RFPs that go out. Again, that caused some issues in that first round, so we think once we have a better handle on what maintenance we're going to do in-house versus contract out, we'll be able to solicit a maintenance agreement under a separate solicitation and negotiation. In-house, like I mentioned, we've got servers to take care of, laptops to take care of, and lateral headings. The third item there, training and decision support system. Some of that's going on now. We're working on developing a Zanjero decision support system to help get the Zanjeros acclimated to using the laptops, what kind of data they might see, how to interpret that data and make sense of it in order to help reduce spill. And then there's going to be a number of training functions going on once contractors are on board. Training on developing the SCADA screens, number of workshops, how we go about getting the data from here to there, what the communication systems look like, that sort of thing. And then there's a third component to the training and decision support, and that's development of a SCADA trainer or SCADA replay function, similar to a simulator that we can use in the office to train the Zanjeros and also take a look at past spill data and how they might make different decisions or better decisions in the future based on how they performed in the past. We've done a lot of work in-house, as I mentioned, a lot of really good work and hard work between our IT and SCADA groups. And we've worked real hard to try and address some of the challenges and questions we got during that first round of solicitation. And we've also really taken a look, as Jesse said, at what we might bring in-house, what kind of tweaks we can make to really make this ours. So we're looking forward to finalizing the RFPs, getting them back out on the street, and hopefully realizing some cost savings and moving forward.
Okay, Josh, thank you. Is there questions from the board for Josh?
No.
Yeah, I have some
Yeah, go ahead,
questions.
Director Hanks.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I'm glad to see that previous RFP get put where it needed to be put.
Yes.
I don't know anybody that understood it, including the bidders, from the information I received back. I have a couple of questions. On moving forward on this RFP, so I assume that's going to be written by our staff pretty much so?
Pen to paper has been AECom, but it has been quite a bit more of a joint effort this time around. We've really taken some ownership of that. We've had a number of internal meetings and workshops to develop what the IT network and tiers need to look like, the SCADA system, and provided all that information to AECom to verbalize.
Okay.
Put verbiage to.
What I'm concerned with is this. I don't know quite what the plan looks like, and I don't know whether we've got buy-in from those that are going to use it. But I would like to know in this process, has it been reduced down to the size of gates, the type of headings that we're going to use, brand names, measurements, Or is this still going to be left up to the individual contractor?
We haven't named specific name brands on gates or monitoring equipment. There are a few instances where we do call out certain manufacturers, but our intent is not to limit it to just those one or two.
Or are you gonna have compatibility then with your SCADA system?
Yes, the specs are written in such a way that we will have that compatibility. There are certain requirements on the technical specs that will help ensure that.
Now, will this RFP be ran past the Water Advisory Board? You know, are we going to look to see what type of buy-in we have before we start moving down this road? I know there's been money set aside for this, but we've also looking at commercial paper to the tune of $200 million. And we've been told part of that may be water. So, you know, before we get too far down the road, I want to make sure we have buy-in, people that are going to participate in this. I understand part of it may be new requirements for measurements anyway. But that's a big concern I have, because if we're going to change the size of the gates, I've already heard about some of the experiments that we ran where they were thin and the gates bowed and 32 inches, 42 inches, all different sizes. I just, you know, if we're going to go out, if we're going to hold a contractor accountable, then we need to have the specs design that requires them to put in, you know, what we're going to hold them to. If they have the freedom to select, I don't know how you hold anybody accountable.
Well, understood. Freedom to select within certain criteria. The lessons we've learned on the orange, for instance, we've tried to incorporate into the development of the gate specs. And if you would like us to take this RFP to the advisory board, I can certainly work with Mr. Silva on that.
I think it's something, Director Hanks, that we can do, that we should do here. As soon as we get them close, we need to just give a presentation to them and tell them what we're doing, because it's all interrelated. And so I agree with you. We should do that, and we will. As far as the specs, I think, you know, Josh is right. We don't name specific brand names, but with the technical specifications, it only allows you certain things. You can't just take a gate. For instance, there's a company in Idaho. I've never even heard of the name, but somebody told me about them. Well, we don't know anything about them, but if they can meet the technical specification, you know, the thickness of the leaf and all that kind of stuff, then we will accept it. If not, we won't. Realizing that these are going to be the first, and once we put them in, that's going to be the standard for the future. So we have to be really careful about that, and we will. But we will be.
Any of these providers be contractors themselves?
I don't see where any of them are contractors, because they're providers only. And that was the problem with the original spec, if you remember, in the original RFP, is that we lumped it all together. And so you had a contractor putting in the bid, but he was utilizing actually providers, and he was tacking on, you know, 25, 30%, and that's the problem that we had.
That's what I'm getting at. They can control the bid.
The way we're doing it now with those three RFPs, it'll be tailored to the providers themselves, so that we're getting the best deal, and that they know what they're doing, because, you know, that's what they do for a living, versus the way we had it before.
Well, I just want to remind everybody, our track record so far with some of our systems we put in have been very spotty. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Director Sanchez or Director Mendoza? Okay, Scott, anybody? Mr. Kalin, you have a question? There's a second mic. Josh, there's a second mic there. You can answer Al's questions if you have.
Al Kalin, Westmoreland. I've got a couple of questions. First, the computers. Is there any new technology that gets away from the big, heavy, armored laptop computer that currently is being used? You see UPS or FedEx come around with a little box that does everything. Is there technology that you've looked into that maybe something like that would work?
In the first round, that first RFP we put out, we did look at things like tablets, iPads, that sort of thing, handhelds. But we just weren't convinced that what was out there would stand up to the abuse and the dust that we get out on the ditch banks. And there's also, they're around water all the time, not just the dust, water. And these are dirt roads they travel every day. So the tough books that we spec out and use now seem to fit the bill the best.
Okay. But I guess I'm concerned that in the future, not too near future, there will be new technology, and so we're going to spend all this money on laptops that in 5 years there's a whole new ball game out there that's much cheaper.
I think I can address that a little bit. I didn't mention the presentation, but one of the things we're doing is scaling back the number of laptops we're purchasing with this first round. Rather than going out and acquiring all 130, 135 laptops, we're going to scale back to about 20 to 30. And that was partly due to our conversations with IT because of the replacement cycles. We didn't want to be replacing over 100 laptops all at the same time every 4 or 5 years. And because technology does change. So we'll phase them in several stages, and that way we can always stay more on the cutting edge of the next version of mobile technology.
The other item I had a question about was spill monitoring. Will that include monitoring of spills from laterals that dump into interceptors?
Most of those laterals are already monitored. I'm trying to recall if there's any on there that aren't. Yeah, I believe all of those laterals are, but I would have to double check.
And you get that information and can control the gates and everything from?
On the spills? I don't know if all of those gates are I don't know that they're
I think it's automated. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that I see a lot of times a great deal of water spilling in those into the laterals that if the Sand Arrows knew that was happening, perhaps they could do something to stop it quicker.
And that's one of the goals of automating the headings is once they see some spill, then they can cut back at the heading.
Excuse me, Al, right now the Sand Arrows don't have the real-time knowledge of that spill, and so it's until we get the system set up to where they can see it and then be able to then radio, at least for now, to have the heading cut back. Once we get these systems in where we have the heading automated and have real-time information on the spills, then he'll be able on his laptop to cut back on his at his heading and eliminate the spill.
It certainly is beneficial. I talked to one hydrographer who has a laptop, and it scared the hell out of him when he saw what was happening in his canal that he'd been running for 20 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's really beneficial.
It'll be a different world, for him, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Any other, Mr. Cox?
Larry Cox, Brawling. A couple of questions. Is this data that's gathered off the spills, is that going to be confidential, or is that going to be public knowledge that Met or Coachella or Met or San Diego could access?
Well, I think once it's in our system, I don't know that we can declare it to be confidential. I mean, it's going to be in the public record, yeah. And we have 30. I don't know how many sites we have now. 35 or something that are currently already receive the information, and we have a spill report right now.
Okay, I just worry about having information that can actually be used against us if it's verified. Just assuming something's one thing, but verifying it's something else. And I also have a question on: are you looking at the meters that you're using on the heading laterals to be the traditional kind where you just got the beam, or what kind of meters are you looking at using on?
Well, that was one of the areas where we thought we needed to open it up a little bit. There's acoustic Doppler technologies out there, a number of different things that could fit the bill. And so the specs are written to require a certain level of accuracy and repeatability, that sort of thing, and calibration requirements. So contractors are free to bid as long as their technology falls within those criteria and fits within that box.
One final question, Jesse. I know that you're still fairly new to getting back on things and stuff like that. And you made a comment of letting the WCAB knowing what you're doing. I'd hope that you could get in front of this thing a little bit better as you get going, and before we get to some of the implement some of the stuff, you've got a pretty good group of guys there who have a lot of experience and do some peer review on this thing and saying, okay, where are we looking? What are we doing in the planning process of these things? And along with your, Mike and Henry and some of your sand heroes, and they might be able to save us some money and headaches if we can get in the planning process.
Yeah, that was a big thing I think that we're doing different, is that those guys, Henry and Mike, for instance, didn't know a lot of stuff that was going on, that was planned. And so we've gotten them involved, and I think as we go along in the future, they're going to be more and more involved, so that when we do things, when we actually go in the field, it helps them also, run the system better, gives them more flexibility to allow us to deliver your water better, so that we're not just looking at it strictly from a water conservation point of view. It should be water conservation plus flexibility. And so without those guys, we wouldn't be able to do it. So now we're getting them more involved, and I think that we will end up with a better system all the way around. And of course, getting the farmers involved then should help us all the way around also.
Hopefully. All right, thanks.
I've got a question for Mr. Cox. Are you satisfied you have a good understanding of the lateral structures so that it will fit or be compatible with your pumping requirements or fertilizer applications? Or is it still an unknown?
You talking about the current situation we have with the laterals, or the planned changes for the laterals?
Planned changes.
No, I don't feel like I have a good enough understanding. I mean, the biggest thing is capacity and carryovers. And I mean, we had a situation last night on the Moorhead where we lost probably 7 or 8 cubic feet per second from midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't really know what happened.
It's the moon. It's the moon effect. Everybody in the north end knows about the moon effect.
Tidal changes. No, to answer, I don't understand. I don't know that's been adequately laid out yet or confirm what's going to happen, but hopefully we can get there before we implement it.
Okay. Mr. Benson, you have a question?
Hi, Steve Benson, Brawley, farmer. Just a quick question on the, you spoke about a schedule, but the timeline of funding and then going into the budget. I know that there was a $200 million short-term debt that was talked about a couple meetings ago, and they were looking at some of that money to go to system conservation. I guess, where does the money come from? Assuming the water transfer is there, do you have a specific account attached to tracking the money for system conservation?
I guess I can only speak to the first phase. What was authorized under the MWA I'm operating on now is all in a separate account and tracked.
Mr. Broking will be before the board next week with that commercial paper item, and you can amplify at that time, Greg, whatever plans you have beyond the distribution projects that apply to water.
Okay. Yeah, so as far as the tracking of the system conservation, I don't know if it's possible to break out what that's going to cost, and then how many dollars per acre foot the costs are going into the system, and then what we're getting back as far as payments. I assume that we're not paying more for a system than we're getting in water transfer funds. That's the hope anyway.
Right, yeah. We have yet to implement. This program it encompasses more than just this first phase I'm talking about, more than just the lateral headings and things. But certain elements like the SCADA system, that would be required infrastructure for all the different projects within the system conservation program. Right. So if you want to talk about tracking costs at the program level, that's something we can certainly do. But it gets difficult to try and break it down into each individual component because they do overlap and kind of are interdependent on each other.
Right, because I know there was a lot of things evaluated, like inline reservoirs and
correct.
You know, if we're looking at more storage or something like that within the system, is it still the pumping across from the west side to the High Line, or no? Is that in the program?
Again, there's a lot of pieces to this, but I think as we go forward, like Jesse said, we'll evaluate each one of those. Do we need it? Is it cost effective for us, or do we think it'll be cost effective for us before we implement? So,
okay.
From this point on, it'll be more of a we'll tailor it a little more.
Right. And then there was another question I've been asked a lot. Is the work going to be done in-house, or is it going to go out to bid? And are you going to evaluate that at each step along the way? Or is that in the estimate as far as how you're coming up with estimates?
Well, the original estimates on the plan were put together as if this was all going to be contracted out. Again, turnkey type approach.
Okay.
The maintenance was kind of a wild card, but as we saw in the responses, it was quite high.
Right.
So we are kind of evaluating that as we go. Again, we got to consider things like impacts to current staffing levels.
Right.
What kind of in-house expertise do we have, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, the hope is that you could train in-house expertise to manage this for the long term, because it's not going away. So, I mean, there's a lot of staff that are willing to work on this, and they're just looking at ways to get involved. I guess, the people that run the system now have a lot of ideas. I don't know how many have been used to implement this system, or was it all outside consultants creating a system?
I think, Steve, that's some of the things that we were talking about that we're trying to internalize is the word I think that Mr. DeMar is using. That is a good word, because originally it was more all contracted out, very little involvement of the current staff, and we're trying to turn that, and I think we have turned it around to where we're involved in the planning. Construction-wise, it's difficult for us because we don't have many construction crews left anymore, so we probably won't do too much construction. But as far as the planning and all that, engineering, we're trying to do as much as possible inside, because like you say, it's a long-term investment for us. We're going to be maintaining it and using it, so we need to be involved in that. Yeah, and that's what we're getting back to.
And then my other question is, how does this relate with kind of the overall maintenance program? Because I know a lot of ditches are in need of repair, and can you timeline it out to where when you're working on ditches and then you're just going in and changing the whole system along a certain run, rather than coming back 2-3 times to the same system, tearing stuff out again and again?
We have to include additional staffing, like Josh mentioned, as we go along, as we start actually building new facilities, the interties, the inline reservoirs, those kind of things. If we build them, we're just going to have to add staffing to make sure that we're taking care of everything, and it's not affecting our other systems.
Well, but it's like the Rita was put in, new a couple months ago, and if you had already torn everything out, you could have dropped new gates in along the way. If you have that set up in advance.
As soon as we get going on the construction, we need to look at all that and
all right,
integrate it into our other maintenance and replacement. Yes.
Okay, and I just reiterate Mr. Cox as far as working with the WCAB and trying to get things in front of them early as opposed to the final hour. And here's the idea we're going to run with, and you guys approve it, because the more time they have to digest things, the longer they can come up with great ideas, and they're the ones out there, the ultimate users. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else have any questions from the audience for Josh? All right. Josh gave a very good presentation. Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you back again.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next item, which is energy. Item number 5, general matters. Mr. Ivy.
President Minville, board members, just a couple of quick items. We're looking forward to the inauguration of the Sun Peak facility coming up this Friday. And we fully anticipate being at the full 23 megawatts of output by mid-June probably. So we'll be doing some testing over the next month and a half to get that up to full speed. Gas prices continue to hover at or below $2 per MMBTU. So staff is working on some more purchases that we should be making this week, and I'll bring you the report on that at next week's meeting. And today we started taking the output from the Greenleaf, the former Colmac facility, the biomass plant. So that's online and running and on our system. They had one unit out for maintenance, but that was planned. We wanted them to get that out of the way so we could have it through the summertime. That's all my comments.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Ivy? Okay, thank you.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Hanks.
What's the status of the queue now? Is that all but dead?
The generation interconnection, we are studying what we're calling Cluster 1, which is the second go-round still. We still have roughly 1,600 megawatts plus or minus in that group.
One with the PPA, right?
That is correct as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCann, you're up next on the System Operations Center staffing and employee retention requirements. It's on page 21.
Good afternoon, President Minville, directors. Dan McCann, Assistant Manager, System Operations. I'm bringing a presentation for System Operations Center staffing and employee retention for information. What I'm going to do is give you a background, present a Desert Southwest wage survey, the proposed system operations organization chart, and the financial impact. For background, we've lost some qualified system operations operators through the last few months. The way we're set up, a loss of one person at one of the higher levels in the office can actually result in new people in 4 different positions. So quite rapidly you can end up with quite a few people that are not highly experienced in some of these operating positions. And that's resulted in the many of the positions in the SOC being recently hired through this step increase through the office. The lack of experience can be detrimental. The SOC is responsible for most of the WEC and NERC operating reliability standards, and the standards that they're responsible for are the minute-to-minute operation of the system. It's not reporting and that sort of thing. It's the minute-to-minute operation. So it's very important that we have the trained personnel in these positions. We feel that the staff that have left are mainly due to pay disparity, both within the IID and with adjacent entities. Like I said, it's very important to maintain the staff so we can continue to remain compliant with the WEC and NERC standards. This is a Desert Southwest wage survey, and it's entities, balancing authorities within the Southwest area. And as you can see, these are the senior operators at these different entities as compared to what our senior operator is currently paid. And we're quite a bit below what the average is. Even with the proposed increase, the IID system operator would still be less than most of these entities. And we did not include entities like San Diego Gas and Electric, Edison, ISO, which make substantially more.
I think you should compare the consumer-owned utilities, because investor-owned utilities probably pay more because they usually have more customers and quite a bit more finances.
That's true. There aren't a lot in this area, and historically this area is one of the lower paid areas within the Southwest. This is kind of hard to see, but our proposal is both for pay increases and adding 6 positions within the System Operations Center. Two of the positions are here in the EMS area. There's been a tremendous increase in the requirements for EMS due to the SIPS requirements, and we're going to have increased workload.
Mr. McCann, for the public, explain what EMS stands for.
Energy Management System. And SIPs are the standards that pertain mostly to the cyber and computer systems that operate the utility. The other increase is going to be due to the Backup Control Center having basically about half of our computer equipment at an alternate location. So there's going to be additional need for resources to take care of that. Another area is the operation engineer. They run studies. Anytime we take out a piece of equipment, before that equipment's taken out, a line or transformer, we have to run simulation studies to ensure that it's not going to adversely impact the system. We have to start sharing these studies with other entities, and these other entities have to share their studies with us. We have to have people that can evaluate those and make sure that that they correspond and there's no problems presented by the equipment outages. The other two positions are one for a training position for the transmission operator and another training position for the generation operator. These positions take 6 to 9 months to get somebody trained to fill those positions. So we need a training position so though we have somebody available to fill those positions in the event of an opening. These are the proposed grade changes for the different positions within the control center. And the cost of this for 2012, which is a partial year, the total labor cost is just under $650,000. That does include benefits, and the cost of the 6 positions is just over $500,000, and the grade changes will be just under $130,000. For an annual figure, the total would be just over 1.1 million.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. McCann?
Mr. McCann, where are we at with the redundant SOC project?
Right now, we're doing the construction out there at the North End facility, and we're just about done with a contract for the EMS system for them to help us move half of it to that location.
Okay, will those funds all be expended by the end of the year?
For the backup control center, no. The majority will, but not all of them.
Well, would some of those funds, keeping in mind that we'd have to budget for some next year, would some of those funds be available for this year?
Well, we only put in the budget the amount that we thought we would spend this year.
Okay, I was afraid of that. I just, for the public, I think they need to understand that the balancing authority is to energy what the water rights are to the water department. It's very
Yes,
important.
that's correct.
I mean, that's, without that, we don't control pricing. There's a lot we wouldn't be able to control.
No, if we can't maintain our balancing authority, I would see a tremendous increase in cost, and we would basically lose control of operating our system.
You know, I'm kind of speaking on behalf of my colleague, Mr. Desert, who's not here today, but I know he's met with you numerous times and with HR. He's been very concerned about the term he used was cannibalize the SOC, and he was very concerned of the dangerous position that could place us in terms of our balancing control area. So I'm in support of this, And I think this is an area, it's a must-have, and it needs to be a strong, well-trained group of people. Without that, then you lead into operational failures, which in turn jeopardizes the balancing authority and compliance issues if we don't resolve those also.
That's correct. And that's one of the things that precipitated the request for the 2 training positions, is looking at it and realizing that if we did lose a couple people in quick succession, that it could cause us problems.
That's the only question.
Okay, Mr. Sanchez, you have anything? Dan, did you have some comments? And I know, Mr. Kelly, did you want to say something about this?
I do, yes.
Go ahead.
Your board voted in support of IID taking on a real-time trading function, which we currently farm out to a third party. When we did that, and as we go forward with it, we established a pay range that that could have led to this further cannibalization that you're talking about. Part of that trading floor rollout is going to be the establishment or the further reinforcement of the firewall between trading and the SOC. There is no more important expression of the IID's balancing authority than the System Operations Center. It goes to the heart of your ability as a balancing authority to manage the electric operation. And I don't want to draw too fine an association with it, but it's probably not a mistake that it's occurring on the same day that we are dealing with this FERC-NERC joint study, and as we head into the heaviest use summer months.
Okay.
So I would like to see the board, I encourage the board to support this, and when it comes before you next week, to approve it with the proviso that we'll be recommending you pay for it out of the Energy Balancing Authority Preservation Fund.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. DeBoer, did you have something to say?
Yes, just to be consistent with our compensation program, we'd like to use the concept of red circling to recognize this as a market issue. So when we bring this back to your board, it won't be proposed grade changes, it'll be a proposed red circle amount, which will be consistent with what Dan McCann's proposal is.
Okay, Director Mendoza, you have anything to say? Okay, is there anybody from the public that has anything to say on this issue? Okay, Mr. Benson, did you have something to say? Dan, why don't you wait in case he's got a question? Mr. McCann.
I just had a question because it's come up a lot in the public about the salary ranges at the IID, and I don't know if you can go back to the grades. As far, are these the, I gotta look at this one, sorry.
You're showing your age.
I know, I can't see that far. The pay grades as far as, are they consistent across the whole organization, or is it just specific for these functions that these pay grades are used?
No, those are pay grades that are consistent across the organization.
Okay, yeah, because like you were saying, the firewall in between it, with the trading going on, a lot of people are worried that one side's going to be overloaded with high paid, and then just to make sure it's balanced.
This would actually close that disparity.
Okay.
Between the two.
And then a question more about where the people come from and where they go if they do leave. I know I run a business, and I'm always worried about losing my top staff. Where do they go? Do they go to the cities, or do they just go for more salary?
Recently, we've lost 3 people between the 2 organizations. One of them to another organization within the valley, and one of them to Southern California Edison, and one of them to the California ISO. So and also into the trading section. So it varies, and that's what we had to look at, is both areas, both within the district, mainly the trading area, and outside the district also.
And then when you recruit, where do you recruit from? Do you recruit from those same places, or do you recruit from more in the desert Southwest and trying to bring them west?
All areas. We try to cover all the areas when we're recruiting.
So the local hire people aren't really here?
Yeah,
positions, or
not
they
for
are?
these positions. Normally for the for the SOC, System Operations Center, the entry level is a distribution operator.
Okay.
And historically, those have come either in-house or from the geothermals.
Okay.
And then from there, you progress up through the organization.
So does the IID have a defined training program where people can enter it and kind of have a path to rise to the top?
Yes, at each step there's a training program, and each step there's certain qualifications that the person has to meet.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. Okay, Dan, thank you very much. We'll move on to finance. Item number 7, energy forecast for 2012, and it's going to be Mr. Broking.
Good afternoon. This is a financial update for the Energy Department. This slide was part of our 2012 budget presentation in December. And I wanted to start with that because that's what we were expecting to occur during this calendar year. What this slide shows is the total revenue that we're projecting for the district, or for the Energy Department, less all expenses including debt service. And then we reduced that amount further by setting aside what we think we'll put in the Balancing Authority Reserve this year. That's the 1/2 cent per kWh, about $16 million a year. And then I believe this year we're spending a little more money on public benefit funds than we're collecting from our customers, so we're going to use some fund balance to offset that. So at the end of this calculation, we have $5 million available for generation and distribution capital projects. And as I mentioned at the time, I gave the budget presentation. For 1 year, we can work through that. We have liquidity options and we have reserves. But obviously going forward, that's not going to be a business model that we're going to be able to maintain based on our capital needs. So the 2012 budget had $163 million of capital. Now some of that, I'll get into that in a minute, is going to be funded by our bond sales for generation. But if you look a little further down, that's only about $88 million. We have about 88 or $89 million that were going to be coming from bond revenues or developer fees or charges. And then we are planning to borrow, we already have borrowed $25 million for CP. And so if you factor those two revenue sources, it gives us $113 million. And so there's about $50 million of capital budgets that we don't have revenues for. And so we're in the process of working with the Energy Department, prioritizing their projects so that their expenditures for the year come in more in line with the 113 as opposed to the 163. So it shows we need 50 million, and just that slide shows we have 5 million. So we're basically $45 million short, and Joel and his staff have been working on those numbers to get them lower. Our current energy rates, and when I say energy rates, I'm talking about the base rate and excuse me, and the ECA, only provide us, here again, $5 million a year after we transfer monies to the Balancing Authority Reserve. The ECA is now set up to collect the expenses for the year. And if there's an overcollection, when obviously we adjust the rate going forward. So hopefully at the end of the year, whether there's been an over or under collection, that we're close to zero in that fund. Although the good news for the consumer is the gas prices have been dropping so rapidly, and now, as Joel mentioned, they're around $2 in MMBTU. Our forecasts have been a little high, because we certainly haven't been forecasting $2 gas in our calculations. But eventually that will work its way out, and we'll be a little closer, hopefully, from month to month on any over or under collection. And then the other thing I'd like to mention is that the energy cost adjustment is really only recovering 76% of the power supply costs. The remaining 24% are funded by base rate revenues. And that really has to do with the function of the formula. It was approved many years ago, and the adjustment, there's basically a 1 cent adjustment, a reduction in that formula, and I think that's what's causing only 76% of the power supply costs to be recovered through an energy cost adjustment. Some of the financial pressures facing the department: revenues have been decreased, and they've been decreased substantially. We've lowered the ECA over the last couple of fiscal years from $5.01 to $3.24 cents, and that equates to about $56 million a year in lost revenue. Other pressures on us, more on the expense side as opposed to the revenue side, is we eventually we get generators signed up for transmission upgrades. We're going to have to pay them back. OPEB funding, we've continued to fund our current OPEB expense. We think that's a little over $11 million for this year. We have growing regulatory requirements. A couple of those are the backup SOCs, about $7 million. And then there's some additional fees that the state of California is proposing to have us pay for water, basically flowing through our hydro plants, and that's about $1.3 million. And then, as I showed earlier, the capital projection or budget for 2012, about $163 million. Now, I expect that to probably go down in 2013 because the El Centro Unit 3 repowering project will be completed by then. But there's still going to be a substantial need for capital improvements. And when I say substantial need, I'm probably looking anywhere from 30 to 50 million a year is what we're going to need on an ongoing basis. And that's providing that there's not any blips along the way, like a major project that we have to take care of. So what's been the result of all these financial pressures? We're still trying to maintain adequate cash reserves. Our goal is to keep at least $100 million in our working capital account. It fell below that at the end of 2011. But one thing that we may have to, and we will bring this back to the board at some point to try to get that $100 million increased, because of that roughly $100 million that we have, $38 million has been set aside for the OPEB fund balance that we've been collecting over the years, and that's money that we want to set aside for future expenses. It's really health care for our retirees, and so if I'm looking at more of what the cash reserve should be. It should be $100 million plus whatever we have in the OPEB account. Now I know we're not going to get there in 1 year, but I think that should be our goal eventually. Is to change it to just $100 million flat to $100 million plus what's in the OPEB account. Because we've reduced our revenues by about $56 million a year, that's lowered our debt coverage ratios. And there's two impacts on that. One, it makes it more difficult to borrow, although I think our coverages are still so that we could borrow. But it will, over the long run, increase our borrowing costs, because the lower coverage ratio you have, the lower you're going to be rated and the higher it costs to borrow money. And then, at least for this year, what we're trying to do is just limit capital spending to about $25 million. And if nothing has really changed to the revenue source for the district, I can't see that going up much higher than that on a yearly basis. I should have mentioned it back here at the very beginning when I showed the 2012 budget. We've already started planning for our 2013 budget, and the targets that we have given to centralized services and also to the Energy Department are 5% reduction on an annual basis. So for the Energy Department, excluding public benefit costs and power supply, that's going to be around $6 to $7 million a year in savings that they're going to be looking for this year out of their budget. And we're expecting all the centralized services to support that same percentage. And then some of the challenges we face is that even though capital is reduced, that has a tendency to increase our O&M expenses, because when we do our budget, we allocate about 29% of labor and associated overheads to capital. And so if the capital projects are not built, they end up being moved over to O&M as an expense. So the reason I'm saying that, you can't really just say, okay, we won't do capital for a year and that'll solve our problem. It won't solve the problem, because there are costs associated with that. And that's, the way we're budgeting is the proper way to budget. We have to budget the labor, our own district labor, in our capital projects. And so that's one issue. That's over $30 million. That could be as much as, I think, $37 million a year that we just have in our own costs in the capital. And then, as Belen Valenzuela has...
Mr. Sanchez has a question.
Greg, in your slide 4, energy cost adjustment recovering only 76% of your power supply costs. Would you give your blessings to the two energy reducing ECA rates twice in the last 2 years?
Pardon me?
Did you give your blessings to reducing the energy ECA twice in the last 2 years?
That wasn't my decision to make. I know it was through board action, and those were reduced, and we adjusted our budget accordingly to show the reduced revenues.
Well, gas prices has been falling.
That's correct. And the way that the ECA is set up to work is that as gas prices fall, the consumer benefits, because our revenues will be less.
Right.
If gas prices were to rise, it would not be to the benefit of the consumer, because the ECA rate would have to rise to reflect those increased costs.
What is the 24% funded? What is the 24% that is funded by base rate in the power supply costs?
It's mainly base cost, our capacity charges.
Because I remember we had a debate one time whether they should be in a base or in the ECA. So if we decided to be in the ECA, if the board decided for it to be in the ECA, why would you call it a base?
No, the board didn't decide for the capacity charges to be in the ECA. The capacity charges are excluded from the ECA formula.
Capacity charges are excluded from the ECA formula. If they're excluded, why is it paying a 24% in the ECA?
It's not in the formula. Isn't that what you said, Mr. Brokey?
But yeah, that's what he said. But he's saying that the remaining 24% of the ECA, because on top it says only 76% of the power supply costs are in the ECA. So remaining 24% of the ECA is being funded by base, yet it's not in the ECA.
The remaining 24% of the power supply cost is coming from base rates.
But the power supply costs.
Yeah, you are correct, Director Sanchez. The 24% is coming from base.
From base, yes. But 24% of what? Power supply costs, which equals to ECA?
It's 24% of the total power supply cost.
Which equals ECA?
No, because the ECA
It says right here,
only
energy cost adjustment recovering only 76% of power supply costs.
The ECA is recovering 76% of that total, and the remaining 24% is coming from base. So if you're recovering $1, 76 cents is being recovered through the ECA, and 24 cents is being recovered through base rates.
So there's a third fund besides base and ECA? Because 76 plus 24 equals 100.
Renewables.
I'm just trying to understand.
It's the power supply costs are whenever he reports to the board on this plunging price of natural gas, that's pretty much the power supply cost that the board deals with in effect, right?
Through the ECA, yes.
Right. So the ECA is the mechanism that's recovering 3/4 of those power supply costs.
Right. And where is the capacity charge right now?
It's being recovered through our base rates.
It's being recovered?
Let me see if I can go back.
Where So why isn't it, if it's in the base rates, why would you make a statement of only 76% of our ECA is being recovered? Technically, it would be 100%, and we're borrowing.
No,
but you're saying no, only 76%.
No, I'm saying the energy cost adjustment is only recovering 76%. The two components of the bill are the base rate and the energy cost adjustment.
Okay.
Director
I'll talk to you
Mendel,
about it later.
when you get through. I've got it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I worked fairly close with Mr. Brokey on this issue. The 24% that's funded out of the base rate is capacity. And as we take on renewables, local renewables, the renewable costs will go into the ECA. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that would also, as we bring in the renewables into the ECA, capacity charges will go down. So it's not going to serve us well right now just to move this over to the ECA and then have it start going down, because if we leave it where it's at, when it starts adjusting down, that will give it some relief. But our problem, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of you here, Greg, but our problem is it's been years, decades, since there's been an adjustment to the base rate.
1994, I believe.
1994. You know, and it's very tough to stay in business without having some type of adjustment. And if this board thinks we can sit here and make this operation here sustainable without looking at that sometime, now we have gone in and we've made adjustments on a lot of areas. We're still looking, and according to the email that Greg sent me last week, had to do with system losses and also some stations. I'm not quite sure, you know, that our terms are different. But this 24% that he's talking about, and he's calling it power supply costs, he's using that as a definition that includes capacity in it. His definition of power supply cost is not the same as energy cost adjustment, the ECA. There's different components. But we're going to have to start looking at the base rate and some type of adjustment. With this 24%, there might be a little relief, but this 76% corrects itself in a ECA floating. And if you go to slide 7, you can see where that ECA is even going to drop down because of the difference in the cost of fuel to 1.8, excluding the rate stabilization fund transfers and over collections that we're working on. So now is the time, you know, it's not political, maybe not right now, okay? But politically, the boards hate to do anything with the rates. But while we're making these adjustments, now might be the time to look at what Greg is presenting here and see how we can adjust that base rate to accommodate the needs of capital and so forth. Go ahead and make our corrections of the CSPs that I know that we're working on to get that funding all level out. And it still would not have a increased rate to the ratepayers. Now there's going to be some adjustments on it, but there's $100 million in this rate stabilization fund. There's $44 million in the over collection. So if you're going to make some adjustments, now's the time to adjust those to cover those costs that we're looking at.
To that point, Director Sanchez just asked Mr. Broking, you know, about whether or not he endorsed the downward revision of the ECA, and it's done nothing but go down for basically a year, and that's a direct result of that of us consistently beating the power supply cost as a part of the budget, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're about to fold in these new renewable products that the board has approved, and imminent. It's gonna occur in June.
Yeah, and it will have an effect on these reserves. We will start pulling those down.
It will.
There's about 4 or 5 years of reserves there to pull down on.
And he's scheduled that.
In the meantime, he's got a problem with capital projects being funded.
Right, which is why he didn't endorse what we're doing and what I've recommended to you, because he wants all the money in the bank.
Well, that's why they call him the CFO.
Well, exactly.
Isn't that, from what I remember, a couple years ago when we had this discussion, was that a penny to the base was on the table, and from what I think I remember, a penny to the base was on the table. So if the penny was on the table to capture capacity charges, that means capacity charges wasn't in the base. My second question is, if the penny, will that recover that 24%? If we raise it a penny, will that cover? Would you be good with that 24%? And my third question is, what Director Hanks had mentioned, have we done our due diligence as far as if the capacity charges go down and the green energy comes into play, do we need an entire penny? And 4 is the energy is, or are we? Am I mixing up both? Or the green energy rate that we're talking about to be instituted, is that the penny?
I think if you let me go through the next few slides, I'll answer most of your questions. If
I
not,
forgot what
just
I
make-
Good point.
After listening to you, Director Sanchez, I forgot what I was going to say.
I remember the conversation we had was we needed to put a penny to the base, and we needed to raise rates a couple years ago to capture the capacity, because capacity needed to be in the base. Now what you're saying, it sounds like, is we're paying capacity. Where do we find that money? I mean, that's great. And maybe that's why that means we reduce rates on our base rates. We're refinancing bonds. We're doing all the right things on base. I mean, that's awesome.
Let him go on. Go ahead, Greg.
This was a month or so ago when Belinda Valenzuela made her presentation showing the impact of the renewable standards on our ECA. And so at the end of 2013, we're forecasting a 1.8 cent increase because of the renewables, and by the end of 2016, 2.6 cents increase. And that's excluding monies that we have in the rate stabilization fund and the over collection. Those monies can be used to mitigate those increases, but if we didn't have those reserves, the two numbers that I've mentioned earlier would be what would have to go up to follow the formula. And then the last challenge is that the planned utilization of the rate stabilization fund will increase need for new revenue because through board action at the budget last year, that money is going to be used it's planned to be used over the next 4 years to limit the impact of the ECA going up. And so as opposed to using that money for capital projects, it will be used to provide rate relief to our customers. So the projected results below include a 1 cent base rate increase in 2013. When I say 2013, the beginning of January of 2013, to fund capital projects, regulatory costs, increases in OPEB, and the start of the payback to generators. This number that we're projecting brings us back closer to the rates that we had in 2009 and 2010. And since I can't read that from here, I'll have to look up my notes to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So in 2013, with the 1 cent increase, we're projecting a system average rate of 13.78 cents. And if you compare that to 2009 and 2010, those were both in the mid 13 cent range, 13.45 and 13.35. So what would really happen if this were to occur is that for the last before 18-month period, there was considerable rate relief giving to our customers. We lowered the rate once in July of 2010, and we lowered it again in 2011, and so during that period, there has been substantial rate relief to the customer. But as I mentioned on slide 1, those rates won't sustain us in the long term. We need anywhere from 30 to 50 million a year for capital projects. A 1 cent increase in the base rate would get us anywhere from $32 to $34 million. So it would go a long way to solving our problem if we were to able to pass that in early 2013.
Mr. Brokin, well, I have a question. Your recommendation 2 years ago was to increase the rate, and we did not.
Yes.
Correct. And it was an election year. Okay. Now, I'm up for re-election, and I've always maintained this to the public and to our staff. The rates need to be adjusted. If the rates need to be increased, you do it for the best of the district, because I'm not going to stand in the way of doing the district's business. You know, win or lose, we have to go forward. The district has to be in a sound financial standing, and whether it's an election year or not, if we have to do it, we do it. And not one of these 5 board members can hide behind saying, well, don't do it this year because I'm running for re-election. I won't play that game. We need to adjust the rates, we do it for the betterment of the district.
Let me make a correction there. We didn't, the recommendation was a 6% increase on both the ECA and the base rate. We didn't do that. We didn't have a rate increase. But at the same time, we also put $100 million into a rate stabilization fund. So it wasn't that a rate was needed. We need to adjust the rate structure to line up with the needs of the expenditures. One area was over collecting, one is under collecting. Okay, so it doesn't, to go and have an increase, okay, when it's not needed. What needs is some adjustment in the rate structure itself. If we don't do that, then the only recourse for Mr. Brokey is to come to us and ask for a rate increase.
Right, and I'm sure he would say that this is a natural response to the board's decision to commit that rate stabilization fund to rate relief.
Yeah. And as we make these adjustments, keep in mind with the renewables coming on, we know that's going to drive an increase in our rates because it is a must-take contract. Okay, you lose the value of a lot of the value of the natural gas reduction because now you're not producing power with gas because now you have to buy the renewables. That's at a fixed cost, and you must use it. So you don't get to adjust by buying cheaper energy somewhere.
Got to have 20% of your portfolio by the end of next year.
So all of these regulations that's coming into place has to be looked at. Renewables, in one sense of a word, is looting from the downward trend in natural gas. But at the same time, when you're bringing the renewables in, it's giving you some relief on capacity, which will benefit the base rate. But all these factors have to be considered in, and we have to look at that flexibility to determine what is the need. The need right now is it's not additional money from the ratepayers right now. It's adjusting the rate structure so that we're moving the money into the right places and we have the right billing. So if we reduce the ECA, you raised it a cent, you might even reduce it 2 cents on the ECA. It might even be a reduction to the ratepayers.
And the renewables that you're adding, that you're already taking on as the off-taker, are all in Valley. They are all, virtually all of them are local generation.
And at the end of the day, the difference, the margin between us and the IOUs that would like to take us over and like for us to pay their rates, with the renewables and the way we've been buying them and purchasing, the delta between what the IOUs ratepayers are paying and what is going to get even wider. You know, we've been very careful about that, and we need to keep up with that. But at the same time, if we don't make these adjustments, we're going to end up with a slumlording in our infrastructures, and we're going to be in trouble with compliant issues.
Right.
What Director Hanks said about you may take away 2 cents from ECA and adjusting and not necessarily raising rates on the customer. So again, it sounded like the possibility of, unless I was hearing wrong, was that the capacity was in the ECA. Yet you're saying it's in the base. So if it's in the ECA, then I could see the minus 2 cents and raising it 1 cent, or minus 1 cent on the ECA and raising it 1 cent on the base. The conversation we had a couple years ago was we need to raise the base rate a penny so we can put the capacity charge in there. But now it sounds like what you're saying is the capacity charge was always paid for by base rate. So why was there the conversation of let's raise the base rate by a penny to cover the capacity charge and remove it from the ECA or the potential of it in the ECA?
Director Sanchez, I'm reminded that the ECA is the variable costs, and I believe that the capacity in 2002 was made a part of the base rate as a fixed cost.
So as of 2002, that conversation about raising the base rate by a penny wasn't necessarily true because we had enough money in there.
It's that 0.99, right?
Yes, that's what I talked about the formula earlier. The ECA formula comes to a calculation and then it reduces it by roughly 1 cent. It's unclear to me why that reduction is being made. I guess it was done way back in 2002 or whenever the formula was first devised and it was used. But
it was, Mr. Broking, it was done because they needed a base rate increase, and there was, the will was not to have an increase. So they just moved some of the items over to the ECA, and the ECA took care of it. And they go back and forth.
Yeah, Mr. Broking, why don't you move on to your recommendations?
Okay. Well, I do want to address Director Hank's comments about a reduction in the ECA. We're certainly not forecasting that, mainly for 2 reasons. One, we know by bringing on the renewables, the ECA is going to rise, and it'll rise rapidly as the percentage increases and these projects come online. And then the other thing is that gas is so low, it's hovering around $2. I can't imagine it staying there for the next 5 years. Not that it couldn't, and I hope it does, but if it goes back to a normal range, it's probably going to be between $4 and $6, which would put upward pressure on the ECA also. So the recommendation, the Energy Department should have enough liquidity through 2012, but it'll need additional revenue in future years to sustain operations and maintain financial stability. And so what we're recommending now is just to get the information out there and start taking action and doing the legwork so that when January comes around, we will have had rate hearings and allow the board to vote on a 1 cent increase. And if you take that in perspective again, if that was to occur, your rate would be similar to what it was back in 2009 and 10 before we had all the ECA decreases. So it's a rate increase from where we are now, but it's really not much of one from where we were when we started because of all the decreases. And then to give you an idea of the retail sales revenue, what we're projecting for 2013 is lower than what we collected in 2008. Now, part of that is because the load was higher in 2008, but it's really hard to operate a business with all the pressures on it to maintain service, and there are increased costs with maintaining our operations to basically not have any revenue, have a little revenue decrease over a 5-year period.
Okay, any further questions? And I know Mr. Benson's got a question.
Yeah,
Any further questions from the board?
Yeah, on your 1 cent increase, did you take into any consideration of the capacity going down, or was that just kind of constant where we're at?
I think there is probably some options that will go away because we'll have more renewables, but a lot of what's in that capacity are our payments to SCAPA for San Juan and Palo Verde, and they're not scheduled to roll off. I think San Juan is 2012, and Palo Verde, I think, is 2017.
But what's I think is the key to this is what you're saying here, the 2013 rate would be about what the 2008, which was about a 5 cent ECA. But that would be inclusive of all of the renewables built in, but excluding the rate stabilization fund still.
Yeah, well, our forecast includes using $25 million a year
so there'll be
to
4
lower the
years.
ECA in its beginning in 2013.
So that would be the first draw off of that 100 million of a 25 million.
Yes, in 2013, if board approves it.
To me, the difference is between the then and now is we were able to put $100 million in the bank to cover against recessions, bad times in the district, even make a few investments. But no, it's about now. When we go back up to 5 cent, it's not about putting $100 more million in the bank. It's about $100 million more in spending.
Okay, Mr. Benson, where did he go? Steve, you have a question for Mr. Broking?
Steve Benson, Brawley. I just had a question on the, well, a couple questions. The ability of the district to spend money from the base rate versus the ECA if there's restrictions one way or another. Does it require different hearings, or how does that work?
You have to have rate hearings.
We have rate hearings whenever we adjust the rate, but all revenue of the Energy Department is pledged to pay its debt service and expenses.
So you can use this, it doesn't matter what bucket it's in, you can use it for anything?
Any lawful expense, yes.
Okay.
Take board action for that.
Right, no, I understand. And then there's been talk about the wheeling rates, and that's really there to cover the transmission costs of other people's power that's passing through, right? Does the wheeling rate figure into this? And there was just a recent drop of the wheeling rate?
The wheeling revenue is factored into our forecast. And so, and you are correct, that represents power that we transmit out of our system for the generators and other utilities.
So is that going to cover all the expenses of all the new renewables that are coming in?
We are forecasting it not to recover exactly all of those expenses, but that's part of what we're going to use the Balancing Authority Fund for, was to make up any shortfall.
All right. One thing that's come up time and time again is, can any of the ECA money be used to put jobs to work, essentially creating more renewable energy here in the valley that the IID owned? And can that money be used to create jobs and long-term benefit for the valley? Or is it something that you have to have someone from the outside come in and do, and then you just pay your fair share for the power? Because it's really a question of the board, is that ability there to even be in the power business? You do run power plants.
The ECA is a rate covenant.
Okay.
So it's obligated.
Obligated to what?
Power supply costs.
Okay, but wouldn't
and there's an upside and there's a downside.
Can you collateralize that money
whenever
go borrow?
We over-collect, okay, we don't get to keep that. Likewise, when there's a downside, we have to raise the rates to cover it.
Right, but as we're saying, solar is going to cost more, and all these other types of power are going to cost more. The biggest use here in the Imperial Valley is air conditioners in the summer during the daytime.
I mean, can we invest that for our own power?
Can you invest that or borrow as an obligation against the ECA fund to go and build your own solar?
I think that's a capital cost.
Excuse me?
I believe that would be considered a capital cost, but you'd have to ask Mr. Broking. Mr. Broking, he was asking a question. Could ECA funds be used to put in our own solar system, or is that considered a capital cost?
Well, I would have to research that, but I think generally right now that ECA is deferred revenue, and the way it's supposed to work is, since it is floating, is to adjust your forecast to what you've over or under collected. So I'm not really sure you could set it aside for a capital project at some later date. It may be possible, I just don't know the answer.
But could you fund a capital project with understanding that you're going to pay it back with ECA funds? Because you essentially have the revenue sitting there that you're going to pay back a capital project with.
I don't know the answer to that question.
It's like a prepaid tariff.
Sounds like, could you use it the way we've talked about the public benefit?
Exactly. The other question is, you had debt service kind of bundled in there, and I didn't know what the total cost of debt service was, and then the total debt of the power side versus the water side. Sometimes it's hard to separate that out. If you have any numbers on that, that would be nice to know, because a lot of people are afraid that we just keep borrowing more money as we go forward, but yet we have money in the bank, and it's hard to break out those funds.
They're in the budget book.
Well, they are in the budget, but there's like 27 different bonds in the budget.
That'd be good reading for you at night.
I've read it.
Put you to sleep.
13 departments.
Okay, go ahead, Greg. Was that it, Steve? You got?
Well, I just wonder what the total debt was of the power side.
It's over 500 million, comprised of two large issues, the 2008 and the 2011. 2008 was used primarily for nylon, 2011 for the El Centro Unit 3 repowering, and we also have the 2003s that are around, I think, $60 million. That's the bulk of the energy debt.
And you have been paying that down or refinancing it, or?
Well, yeah, we make yearly payments on all three of those. So I can't tell you what the debt service payment is off the top of my head, but I can get that information for you.
Okay. No, all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Greg. We're going to move on. Well, Greg, you're up again for the transfer of personal and corresponding budgets.
If I could just make one last comment on
go ahead.
My presentation, that our power resource manager has ongoing negotiations with some non-renewable generators, and those specific negotiations aren't included in the forecast that I provided you. Yeah, I'm on page 39, 40, and 41 of the board package, and it's a budget transfer that we're bringing to the board for approval. It's transferring money from the general manager's office to the water department, and then transferring money from the governmental affairs to the general manager's office. And both transfers are not exactly the same, but they're fairly close.
All right, you'll bring us back for action next week. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the action items. Number 9, appropriate action on email security issue. I'm the one that brought this forward. I know Vance Taylor is going to come up and talk on this, but I want to go ahead and make a motion that requests that the IID perform an investigation to determine if the emails were improperly taken from Director Menville's computer, and refer the matter to outside authorities for further action if warranted. I'd like to get a second on that, please.
Second.
Okay, Vance.
Good afternoon, President Menville and members of the board. My name is Vance Taylor. I'm Assistant Counsel and Ethics Officer. The subject of this item is our email security here at the district. As you are aware, President Menville has alleged that certain of his district emails were wrongfully taken without his knowledge and consent and disseminated to members of the public. Over the last year or so, these emails have worked their way into the public discourse. As a result, President Menville has asked that this item be placed on today's agenda in order that the board might take appropriate steps to determine if, in fact, a theft of district email has occurred. If President Menville's emails were, in fact, compromised, that would be a very serious matter, and those responsible could face criminal and civil liability. As such, President Menville has requested that an investigation be performed to determine if the emails were stolen, and if so, by whom. I've spoken with the general manager about Director Menville's request for an investigation, and the general manager agrees that an investigation is warranted under the circumstances and has asked that I lead that effort as the ethics officer. I've committed to him that I'm prepared to do that.
Okay, is there any questions for Mr. Taylor on this issue that we have a motion on?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
When you, in your investigation then, so you're going to look at theft, but you would also look to see if there was negligence of communication protection, maybe department negligence of file protection, which we just had an investigation by Navigant over that very item. I'd also like to know about abandonment of equipment. You know, what is the track of this equipment? Where has it gone? Where is it at? And was there any violations of surplus property? And then one of the things, I think in your review, you'll have to make a determination whether there is a whistleblower status, because there are allegations that some of the information that was revealed, regardless of how it was revealed, is not a defense of some of the unethical and illegal operations that was revealed that this organization is participating in.
Well, I actually had planned just to make a threshold determination as to whether or not the emails were in fact stolen, and if so, how that occurred. And then I think at that point, we'll probably be at a crossroad where we need to...
At that point, then that probably becomes a personnel issue, right?
Yes, I think it could, depending on what the investigation reveals. I think that it also could require the matter to be taken to law enforcement, depending on what the investigation turns up.
How about Attorney General or maybe the State Bar Association?
Possibly the Attorney General comes to mind as potentially a agency with jurisdiction over computer crimes, this sort of thing.
Right. Well, I'm talking about the content that was revealed. I think it probably needs to have a State Bar look at it too.
We did talk about that. If, as an officer of the court, I believe Mr. Taylor's prepared to make judgments about the appropriateness of some of these communications as far as their content.
That's fine with me.
Is there any further questions from the board?
Yeah.
For Mr. Taylor?
I have one question or comment, Director Menville. Moving forward with the investigation, I think it'd probably be appropriate. I know we just had we had multiple workshops on multiple issues, but I think that I think if the investigation will be widened, I think it needs to be widened in totality and not just specific person. I think let's take it to the next level and investigate every single person, not only on the board, but as well as every single individual in the district. That's 1,400 employees, on whether they had misconduct. Just because one arises doesn't mean that there isn't bad behavior anywhere else.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Director Sanchez, but I do think we need to try and stay on task. I think the issue is, were the emails stolen, and if so, by whom? And I think that, right, and I think that one... Mm-hmm.
I think we need to focus on exactly what you're talking about. And let's get that resolved, and then we can go on from there.
That's my thinking, Director Mendoza.
Okay, is there anybody from the public? Bruce, did you have something? Go ahead.
No.
Whatever you want to do. You can go around. You go around the front,
I'll
go
let
around
you,
the back,
Bruce.
whatever.
In the course of this investigation, are you going to do this as the assistant counsel, or are you going to do this as the ethics officer? And the reason I ask is, if you do it as the assistant counsel, then of course there's the client attorney privilege. But if you do it under the ethics, then the public, I assume, would have access to anything you find in your discovery.
Those are issues that I would discuss with the board in closed session. I'm not prepared to discuss those types of issues in open.
Well, I'm not asking you to do it now.
Bruce, he can't waive the attorney-client privilege no matter what he's doing. I don't understand.
Well, because he said he was going to do it because he was the ethics officer. As the ethics officer, it's a public employee, not necessarily the assistant counsel. So I'm just trying to determine which hat he's going to wear when he does this.
I don't think the assistant counsel hat is a hat that I can ever take off, if
There you
that
go.
helps.
Yeah, he also can't waive attorney-client communications on behalf of his client, no matter what his task is, without his client's permission.
Which is exactly what I was trying to say, because there was no need to mention as the ethics officer, because he does enjoy, or I don't mean that in the literal, but the attorney-client. Therefore, as an assistant counsel, everything he does in discovery is private.
Bruce, no. You're making certain presumptions that don't make sense, which is that there's
Well, good,
two
enlighten me.
Well, it's hard to enlighten you because I don't understand the presumptions, but the presumption is that the ethics officer somehow has some ability to waive confidences. He's doing the investigation in his role as an employee of the district. He happens to be an attorney. He happens to be the ethics officer. The fact that he's doing an internal investigation does not mean that somehow confidences are being waived or not waived, and that's where the presumption is. So I'm not sure how to respond because I don't understand the underlying assumptions that you're making.
Okay. One, I'm not making any assumptions. I asked a question because he said he would do it as the ethics officer, which basically splits. But
why does it split?
It gives the illusion that there's some sort of split, and I just want to clarify that there is no split.
No, he's
wait.
Okay,
I'm saying there
you.
is no split.
All right.
Okay, I want to make that clear. There you go. Now, if this goes further, and in the course of discovery, when is it shared with the public? At any time? Because they're gonna. There's something out there, I assume.
Go ahead, Ann.
I think that depends entirely on what the investigation reveals. I think it's just too early to start making predictions about what's likely to happen.
Okay, but I guess it boils down to be careful what you wish, because some of that stuff is going to become public information, and I would look forward to that.
Thank you, Bruce. Mr. Morgan?
Is it fair to assume that once these emails got into the public, that being property of the IID and the IID belonging to the public, that it's fair for them to be discussed in public? Because I mean, the email that most concerned me was of one that was from David Osias to John Pierre, talking about the Department of Fish and Game bringing a settlement deal to IID to settle the QSA lawsuits.
No, it's
and so that was squashed. I mean, that the Fish and Game was squashed by efforts that did not include this board. I don't think Stella or Anthony knew about it. I don't think if Jim was there, he knew about it. I don't know if Matt was there or Mike Abadi was there. It was never brought to the board. Will that be part of the investigation, that someone's running a big portion of the IID behind the scenes using one or two people?
No, it's not fair to assume that stolen confidential material that is IID property that is given to the public somehow becomes non-confidential. And in fact, there are all kinds of possibilities here as far as IID taking action to protect its property, as far as civil or criminal action, and as far as employee action. So I wouldn't make that assumption. As far as the second part of your question, which is how's he going to do the investigation, I'd rather Mr. Taylor answer that.
Well, yeah, well, the question would be being both of the counsel's office. If the emails show criminality, is that worth squashing and covering up, or does that make the person who leaked them out, who saw this pattern of single people manipulating the IID, does that make him a whistleblower? And so it's self-examination of your own agency when that's going on is questionable, because you can't be transparent. You're going to do it in closed session. You're going to vote 3-2.
I think that regardless of what's found or the facts, that it's incumbent on IID when it's over, if it's over, to share those results to the extent it can by law. And it would be a shame for you to be the only one privy to this information.
Well, I'll give you the emails I've seen two. I read one to you.
Clearly,
and I gave it to you.
The public is entitled to the same benefit that you enjoy.
Did you release that one I gave to the board, to the public, to the newspaper? Because I'll find the Fish and Game one. I'll release that to the newspaper if you'd like.
I think your question was, is it proper for people to be trafficking in these documents?
That-
Are they
then I-
public by virtue of the fact that they're out in the public domain?
So it'd be better for me to turn it over to the paper.
I think that you ought to pursue every official avenue possible. Certainly, he's going to look into that.
Thank you.
Mr. Morgan.
I have one question for Mr. Taylor. In your investigation, would it be possible for you to look into confidential information that was discussed in printed form in closed session, that particular information has been given out to the public? Would that even be part of something you can look at? Because it's come to my attention there's printed documents that were discussed in closed session for closed session only that have been out in the public domain. And they were probably given out by, I'm not going to name names, but.
Well, if you're asking, is it okay to circulate and disseminate those emails by virtue of the fact that they're already out? I don't think so. I think that, they're subject to the attorney-client privilege, a couple of them. One of them is a deliberative material that would not be released pursuant to, I don't think any of the emails would be released pursuant to a Public Records Act request. So if there are still emails that are floating around and people have them, I would encourage them to, seek the advice of counsel as to whether or not, it's a wise thing to disseminate that material.
Information. Is it all right to send to just one member of the board and not to the rest of the board? Is that confidential client privilege information?
I think it would depend on the context. I'm not quite sure I understand your question, Director Hanks.
Well, I think there's client privilege information, and I think it's client privilege information between attorneys and so forth. But then whenever it's forwarded to somebody else, then I think it loses that status. And I have been to an attorney to ask that question.
It depends who it's
I've been to
forwarded
two
to.
attorneys to ask that question.
If attorney-client information is intentionally revealed to the public, and there's a waiver.
I'm talking about withholding information from a board member that needs that information to make a decision. That's what I'm talking about.
If attorney-client information is intentionally waived and provided to the public, the privilege may be waived.
This brings a very good point. I've always disliked the two board committees. So there's two committee boards always on with the two board members at the county, two board members on energy, two members on water. They speak, and I've never gotten information on, and everybody on this board is on a committee. So we can move anything forward. I'd like to get rid of those two board member committees.
Any further comments from the public? Got Mr. Ramos.
Tony Ramos, Central Resident. JP and members of this meeting, what we're trying to do here is center on one topic, on that email that I think was the confidentiality of the IID and its members and its board members and the trust we have in it was compromised. Let's deal with that first. And then I've heard, Mr. Hanks, that you and Mr. Desert talk with people of the other side about issues that happen in closed session.
Well, then bring it forward, whatever it is, reveal it.
Just like you said right now, you've heard the same thing I've heard it. So they may end up investigating you too.
I hope you in God we trust.
That's right. And I hope you too.
And there is also
and I hope you too,
that
sir.
shall not bring false witness against thy neighbor,
point fingers
too.
Because you point fingers, but when people point fingers at you, you don't like it.
Okay, Tony.
Mr. Hanks, you've done that before.
If there's any information,
and we can
I
be
took
civil
from
about
close,
this
bring it
issue
forward.
outside. But let's talk man to man.
Okay,
if
Tony.
Point fingers. Hey, JP, he's, in public comments, sometimes the public has a right to speak under the Brown Act. And right now it's an open session. We both have the right.
This is not public comment.
No, I know. I said in the public comment. Now we both have it.
The right to
so
respond.
I have the right to speak, and you have the right to rebuke what I'm saying. But you don't like what I'm saying because I know that when Michael Body was here, he disseminated. He was accused sometimes of giving information to the public or friends of his I'm not going to say what, but he was. Now, this is going to open up a can of worms, and let's open up a can of worms. But right now, to avoid you being investigated, to avoid Stella or Mr. Sanchez or anybody else being investigated, let's deal with just what's in hand right now.
That's good.
If anything else comes up later, let's do it. But I'll tell you what, this is a political year, and they're trying to use this against you, JP and Stella. They're trying to say that you guys are out there talking about things that you shouldn't, when they did it too. So it's no different than what they did, so don't feel bad about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to call for the question. Please vote. Thank you. Okay.
Look, Matt Desert's not here.
How did he vote no if he's not here?
Is his spirit here?
Tony voted for him.
This ghost is here. Okay, we're going to move on to item number.
We have to vote again.
You got to vote again because you
vote again. Please vote again.
One absent.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to.
He's got special powers.
We're not going to take a break. We're going to try to finish this meeting up. So we're going to number 10, adopt position on two pieces of legislation, AB 1771 and SB 1332. Antonio.
Good afternoon, President Manville, members of the board. And actually, although there are your agenda states that there are two recommendations for two bills. Last Thursday, late in the afternoon, one of those bills, unfortunately, failed passage in its policy committee, and that is the first one on your list, AB 1771. And that was actually a very good bill, and that's just what happens in Sacramento sometimes.
Why? What was the reason that it failed?
I think it was mostly that the committee consultant and the chairman of that committee did not like the bill. And that was part of my comments, that sometimes the good ones, for political reasons or special interests, don't get out, and the ones that
in Sacramento for political reasons, I'm shocked.
Yeah. So and actually, again, that bill had actually passed its first committee. It was double referred. But then in the second committee, again, because of some of those issues, it was pulled, or actually it failed, and the author did not ask for reconsideration, which ultimately tells us that he is not going to bring it back with any amendments. Therefore, the bill is dead, and we will not be taking a position on that or asking you to take a position on that. So I will move forward, though, to the next bill, which is Senate Bill 1332. And what this bill would do is it would mandate that all publicly owned utilities with 75,000 customers or more adopt a feed-in tariff program by March 1st of 2013. The bill, additionally, what it would also do, it would require those same POUs to include a specific pricing mechanism when calculating their feed-in tariff. That is actually the component that is troubling to all the POUs out there that are looking at adopting a feed-in tariff, including the IID. And by doing so, they would ultimately give the state or the PUC authority to supersede your authority here as a local public utility. Current law states that we can adopt a feed-in tariff based on the needs of our own utility, and that is what we're moving in that direction along with other utilities across the state. But if this bill is not amended to remove that provision, then again, the state would tell us how we should be pricing our feed-in tariff contracts. So for that reason, if you look at the recommendation for SB 1332, it's not to support the bill, but it's to support if it were amended. And the suggested amendment would be there, and I listed that, to not impose the feed-in tariff pricing mechanism or mandate the inclusion of any added costs that can ultimately be rolled over to the ratepayers or subsidize one for another.
Okay, is there a motion for SB 1332?
Move to approve.
Is there a second? Okay, any discussion?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can vote for this. This is just more legislation that's just looting the coffers of our ratepayers. It's the renewable is probably a good effort, good cause. It's very expensive, and now whenever they start getting down to try to discredit some of our off-peak demand and so forth, and not give us credit for that, I'm not sure that's the way to go.
Director Hanks, current law states that POUs over 75,000 customers, which would include IID, we have to adopt a feed-in tariff. That's already been in the books for 2 years. So the POUs have been given some time to look at the models that are out there and to adopt a feed-in tariff. What this would do is it would move the goalposts a little bit further, if you will, and it would mandate the type of structure that we shall have. It is in my opinion that if we just sit idle and not take a position and ask them to remove such provisions, then we will be mandated to do more. And again, passing the cost to the ratepayers.
Is to
support if amended.
With a suggested change.
Correct,
Yeah.
and it would be to remove the mandate on a pricing mechanism or structure.
And I'll call them all. Are there any other discussion? Any public discussion? Could please vote.
We're voting?
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to next item, which is number 11, internal auditing, general matters. Betty?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board. Just have one thing. We're hoping that we will bring the study that the board asked us to perform on the water transfer revenue prior and post Fifth Amendment, and we are almost done with our work. So we hope to bring it to the board on May 15th meeting. Everything,
Okay.
Unless you have anything for me, that's it. That's all I have.
All right. Any questions for Betty? Okay, Betty, thank you. We'll move on to finance, number 12, financial update for the month ending February 2012. Mr. Broking?
Yes, I'm on page 58 of the board package, the Energy Department income statement. A couple of meetings ago, I believe as Director Hanks asked a question about the net loss on the income statement for the Energy Department. And if you go to column E, line 16, you'll see that the approved budget forecast about an $18.6 million loss for the year for the Energy Department. We set our rates based on cash flow, and as I presented earlier, our rates are not going to cover what we need for capital this year. So, based on that, we know our rates are very tight. And so what's really driving the loss is, if you look at line 13, is provision for depreciation. That's $51 million. That's a non-cash item that we have on our income statements that we don't budget for, since it is a non-cash item. But ideally, your rates would be set such to recover your depreciation, because at some point in time you're going to need to replace most of your assets. And then the other thing I would like to point out on this page is is line 17, or debt coverage. In prior years, most immediate years, we've been over 2 times, sometimes much higher than that, even after reducing it for the amount of money that we're putting in the rate stabilization fund. For a AA minus utility, the rating agencies, and this is all subject to change, but they like to see 2 times or 2+ times coverage for your direct debt. It's my opinion 1 year dropping below that will not result in a downgrade, providing that we have the rate increase at the beginning of 2013, at which we can start showing that okay, it was just a 1 year blip, and then moving forward, our rate coverages should be higher.
Okay, any questions? Is that it, Mr. Broking?
For this month, yes.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Broking, on our system losses, do you have a kind of a target that you think would be acceptable? Basically, industry standards for organization like ours?
Well, I have, I guess, my own opinion. Joel Ivey's probably a better person to ask than me, but I think 7 to 8% is probably fairly reasonable. I mean, there's a lot of factors that, my understanding, a lot of factors that go into the line losses. One is the temperature of the area, and obviously we're in a very hot area, which I think kind of increases the losses. And then the size of your system. We're a very large system, and the voltage that we use. So I think kind of all those three factors work against us to probably have a little higher line losses than other utilities, but I'll defer to Mr. Ivy on that.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. Brokin? We need to, oh, there you are. You're going to talk. Sorry about that.
I've been cut off before. It's okay.
Go ahead.
I mean, it has been my experience in the past too. At a different company, we calculated a 6% transmission loss rate. We went to set our rates with the FERC through this calculation, and through some settlement arrangement with the counterparties, we negotiated it down. So although you may see lower rates in other areas, that very often is a negotiated number.
Yeah. Well,
so 7 to 8% for us is probably realistic.
Since my tenure on the board, there was some items that I was concentrating on, and we're kind of down to 2. And I know that they've been working on the CSPs. I'd like to see a report, follow up, and see how we're doing there. And the other has been line losses. When Mr. Cope was here, he talked about bringing someone in with a specialty to try to run that down. Just numbers, it looked like we were about 12.2%. If that is accurate, and say 7% is industry standard, then there would be about 5% that we're looking at. So I would think as we're moving forward, we're looking at rate increases, that we would really try to get this in line with the industry standards.
We agree, and I think the 12% numbers, we budget conservatively on our line losses when we put our budget package together. Hopefully we improve upon what that budgeted number is, but maybe what we can do is go back the last 10 years and provide the board with what the actual line losses have been for each year as a starting point, and then start researching how well we're doing limiting those.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'd like to move that the board acknowledge the receipt and accept the financial report for February 29, 2012.
Is there a second? Okay, is there any further discussion? Please vote. Thank you. We'll move on to the last item, which is the budget amendment to increase the attic insulation program. Sandra?
That would be an increase of $375,000.
Yeah.
I move to approve.
Second? Okay, it's been moved and second. Please vote.
Okay.
Okay, Eddie, you got your increase.
Done.
That's the end of the meeting. Thank you. The next meeting is the 8th, next Tuesday.